Highway 31 runs along its western edge. Small towns, Baldwin, Wellston, Brethren, rest at its borders. Families camp here. Hunters know these woods. Yet since 1970, 34 people have vanished from this corridor without leaving clear evidence of direction, intent, or outcome. What sets these cases apart is not their number but their consistency. Vehicles found with keys in ignition, gear arranged neatly beside trails, search dogs that track scent for hundreds of yards before stopping abruptly at unmarked points, witnesses who describe seeing individuals moments before disappearance, walking calmly, showing no distress. The pattern repeats across decades with measured regularity, documented in sheriff's reports, ranger logs, and search and rescue summaries filed across 5 counties. This documentary does not offer explanations. It examines records, 12 chapters built from official documents, field observations, and quiet testimonies gathered from those who search these woods professionally. What follows is not speculation. It is an accounting of what has been documented, what remains unresolved, and what the forest continues to hold. The Manistee National Forest covers portions of Wexford, Lake, Mason, Newaygo, and Oceana counties in Michigan's Lower Peninsula. The terrain is not dramatic. Elevations range from 700 to 100 feet above sea level. The landscape consists of rolling hills, river valleys, and wetland depressions left by glacial retreat approximately 12,000 years ago. The forest is divided into eastern and western sections, separated by a corridor of private land. Most disappearances occur in the western section, particularly along the corridor bounded by the Père Marquette River to the north, the Manistee River to the south, and M37 to the east. The forest is accessible. Over 330 miles of roads traverse it, most unpaved but maintained seasonally. The North Country Trail passes through its northern sections. Popular recreation areas, Udell Hills, Bowman Lake, High Rollaway, draw thousands of visitors annually. Cell coverage is inconsistent but present near main roads. The forest does not isolate visitors the way true wilderness does. Yet year after year, people enter this ordinary landscape and do not return. The Michigan State Police maintain active files on 34 unsolved disappearances within this region since 1970. The cases share common features. Most involve individuals hiking, hunting, or driving forest roads alone. Weather conditions at the time of disappearance are typically mild. No signs of struggle appear at last known locations. Items recovered are often positioned in ways that suggest placement rather than loss. Searches follow standard protocols and regularly fail to locate subjects despite rapid deployment and extensive coverage. What distinguishes the Manistee cases from missing persons incidents elsewhere is the presence of details that appear in ranger logs but rarely in public summaries. Footprints that appear alongside human tracks, larger, deeper, with stride lengths that exceed normal human gait, broken branches at heights above typical human reach, and the consistent testimony from search dogs that refuse to continue past certain points, displaying what handlers describe as active fear response rather than simple scent loss. This documentary does not focus on mystery. It examines patterns documented across more than 5 decades of incident reports. What follows is a slow examination of how terrain, behavior, and circumstance intersect in ways that challenge conventional search and rescue assumptions. The cases presented here are real. The names are real. The outcomes remain unresolved. The Manistee National Forest contains approximately 260 miles of unpaved forest roads, designated as Forest Service roads and numbered for reference. These roads were originally logging routes, cut between 1880 and 1920, when the region was clear-cut for timber. After reforestation efforts began in the 1930s, many roads remained in use for forest management, recreation access, and fire control. Over time, secondary paths branched from primary routes. Old skid trails, hunting access points, paths to fishing spots. Some appear on USGS topographic maps, others do not. Navigation on these roads presents challenges distinct from trail hiking. Roads create a false sense of security. They suggest maintenance, direction, and eventual return to main highways. In practice, forest roads in the Manistee often dead-end at clearings, loop back on themselves, or taper into two-track paths that become indistinguishable from deer trails. GPS devices frequently lose satellite connection under dense canopy. Cell towers are spaced widely, leaving coverage gaps that can extend for miles. Drivers accustomed to roadway navigation may not recognize when they have transitioned from maintained routes to abandoned paths. In June 1978, a schoolteacher named Daniel Kroger, aged 41, drove into the forest near Baldwin to scout hunting locations before fall season. Kroger was familiar with the area, having hunted there for 8 consecutive years. He drove a green Chevrolet Blazer and carried topographic maps, a compass, and a CB radio. Weather conditions on June 17th were clear, with temperatures near 68 degrees Fahrenheit and no precipitation. Kroger informed his wife he would return by 6 p.m. When Kroger did not return, his wife contacted the Lake County Sheriff's Office at 9:30 p.m. Search efforts began the following morning. On June 19th, deputies located Kroger's Blazer parked on Forest Service Road 5118, approximately 11 miles northeast of Baldwin. The vehicle was unlocked. Keys rested on the driver's seat. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 full. Maps were folded neatly on the dashboard. The CB radio was switched off. No signs of mechanical failure were evident. Searchers found footprints leading from the vehicle into the woods, heading southwest. The tracks were consistent with Kroger's boot size. Approximately 40 yards from the vehicle, a second set of tracks appeared, running parallel to Kroger's path. These prints were notably larger, measuring approximately 16 inches in length compared to Kroger's 11-inch boot prints. The stride length between the larger prints measured 52 to 58 inches, considerably longer than typical human stride. Deputy Thomas Aldrich photographed the tracks and noted in his report, "Secondary tracks observed. Origin unclear. Size and spacing inconsistent with known wildlife in region." Searchers followed both sets of prints for approximately 600 yards before losing them on rocky ground. Search dogs were deployed. They tracked Kroger's scent along the same route, but stopped abruptly at a small clearing surrounded by second-growth pine. K9 handler Raymond Moss noted in his report, "Scent terminated at clearing center. No dispersal detected. Dog exhibited strong avoidance behavior, backing away from clearing and refusing to re-enter despite multiple attempts. Behavior inconsistent with standard scent loss." The search continued for 6 days, covering a 5-mile radius from the vehicle. Helicopters surveyed the area. Ground teams walked grid patterns. On the 4th day of searching, volunteers discovered a patch of disturbed ground approximately 1 mile northeast of the clearing where the dog had refused to continue. Small branches and saplings in the area showed fresh breaks at heights between 7 and 9 feet above ground level. No equipment capable of reaching those heights had been used in the search operation. No explanation for the breaks was documented. Daniel Kroger was never located. His case remains open with the Lake County Sheriff's Office. In September 1985, a retired auto worker named Gerald Sutton, age 63, entered the forest to photograph fall foliage. Sutton lived in Ludington and was experienced with forest roads, having worked as a surveyor for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources in the 1960s. He drove a blue Ford pickup and carried camera equipment, water, and a sandwich. On September 28th, Sutton left home at 10 a.m., telling his wife he would explore roads near Bowman Lake. Sutton did not return that evening. His wife reported him missing on September 29th. Search teams found his pickup on Forest Service Road 5629 on September 30th. The truck was parked at the edge of a 2-track path, facing a dense stand of oak and maple. The engine was cold. The driver's door was slightly ajar. Sutton's camera bag rested on the passenger seat, closed and intact. His sandwich wrapper sat on the dashboard, unopened. The truck showed no damage. No note was found. Footprints led from the truck toward the tree line, heading east. Approximately 25 yards from the truck, searchers noted additional impressions in soft soil beside Sutton's tracks. These impressions were deeper and larger, with visible toe definition that suggested bare feet rather than boots or paws. The impressions measured approximately 15 inches in length and showed 5 distinct toe marks. Search coordinator Linda Voss photographed the impressions and wrote in her field log, "Unidentified bipedal tracks observed parallel to subject's path. Configuration does not match any documented wildlife. No further comment." Searchers followed the tracks for approximately 300 yards before they ended on a patch of exposed bedrock. Dogs tracked Sutton's scent to the same location and stopped. The lead dog, a German shepherd named Rex, exhibited what handler Michael Torres described as extreme distress response, whining, pulling backward on the lead, and urinating submissively. Torres wrote, "Dog behavior suggests presence of dominant predator or threat stimulus. Unable to continue track, second dog deployed with identical response." The search extended over 8 days. Teams covered terrain in all directions from the truck. Divers searched Bowman Lake. No further trace of Sutton was found. His camera was never recovered, though searchers located his camera lens cap, placed carefully on a stump approximately 400 yards from where the dogs had stopped. The cap was clean and positioned lens side up. Gerald Sutton's case remains unresolved. Roads in the Manistee do not behave like roads in urban or suburban environments. They lack signage beyond occasional Forest Service markers. They intersect without clear hierarchy. A road that appears primary may become impassable within a quarter mile. Drivers unfamiliar with this network can become disoriented quickly, particularly during overcast conditions when directional references weaken. Yet in cases like Kroger's and Sutton's, disorientation does not fully account for the pattern. Both men were familiar with the forest. Both carried navigation tools. Both exited their vehicles voluntarily, leaving keys and gear behind in organized states. Both left clear footprints that were accompanied by unidentified bipedal tracks of unusual size. Search dogs, trained to follow scent until dispersal or termination due to water, wind, or contamination, consistently lost trails at points where none of these factors were documented, and exhibited fear responses that handlers found remarkable enough to include in official reports. The forest roads continue to branch. Vehicles continue to be found. The pattern persists in reports filed year after year, accumulating without resolution. The Manistee National Forest is dominated by mixed hardwood and coniferous stands. Common species include red pine, white pine, jack pine, red oak, white oak, and maple. These species create dense canopies during growing seasons, with foliage coverage reaching 80–90% in mature stands. Canopy density affects sound propagation in measurable ways. Sound travels through air as pressure waves. In open environments, sound disperses uniformly in all directions until dissipating based on inverse square law principles. In forested environments, foliage interrupts wave propagation. Leaves, branches, and trunks absorb sound energy. High-frequency sounds, such as human voices, are absorbed more readily than low-frequency sounds. Studies conducted by acoustic researchers in forested settings show that voice range under dense canopy can be reduced to 30–50 yards, compared to 200–300 yards in open terrain. This reduction creates what psychologists term proximity illusion. Individuals separated by short distances may be unable to hear each other despite shouting. This phenomenon contributes to disorientation and complicates search and rescue efforts. Searchers may pass within close range of lost individuals without auditory contact. Lost individuals may believe they are farther from help than they actually are, leading to decisions that increase separation rather than reduce it. However, in several Manistee cases, the acoustic pattern reverses. Sounds carry across distances that should be impossible given forest density and known acoustic principles. These sounds share consistent characteristics: low frequency, sustained duration, and volume that suggests a source significantly larger than human. In August 1992, two friends, Michael Hartman, age 29, and Robert Klein, age 31, entered the forest near Wellston to hike a portion of the North Country Trail. Both were employed as electricians in Grand Rapids and had hiked together for several years. They planned a 6-mile loop beginning and ending at a trailhead off Forest Service Road 5436. Weather on August 14th was partly cloudy with temperatures near 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility was good. Both men carried day packs, water, and maps. At approximately 2:30 p.m., the pair stopped to rest near a stream crossing. Klein walked approximately 50 yards downstream to filter water. Hartman remained at the trail to adjust his pack. According to Hartman's later testimony, Klein was visible when he walked toward the stream. Hartman looked down to tighten a strap. When he looked up less than a minute later, Klein was no longer visible. Hartman called Klein's name. He received no response. Hartman walked to the stream. He called repeatedly, moving along the bank in both directions. He heard nothing. Hartman returned to the trail and waited, assuming Klein would return shortly. After 10 minutes, Hartman heard what he initially believed was Klein calling back to him. The sound came from deeper in the forest beyond the stream. In his statement to investigators, Hartman described the vocalization. It sounded like someone calling out, but not quite right. Too deep. It had a howling quality at the end. It was loud, much louder than it should have been given the distance. I could hear it clearly, like it was only 30 or 40 yards away, but it sounded like it was coming from much farther out. Hartman called back, believing Klein was signaling his location. He received another vocalization in response. Similar in character, coming from the same general direction. Hartman moved toward the sound. After walking approximately 200 yards beyond the stream, Hartman heard the vocalization a third time. It now seemed farther away rather than closer, despite Hartman moving toward it. Hartman stopped, confused. He heard nothing more. At 4:00 p.m., after waiting and calling for over an hour, Hartman hiked back to the trailhead and drove to Wellston to report Klein missing. Search teams arrived within 2 hours. They deployed ground crews and dogs. K-9 units tracked Klein's scent from the trail to the stream, then followed it upstream for approximately 400 yards. The scent trail ended at a cluster of fallen logs. Handler Patricia Nguyen reported, scent terminated without environmental cause. Dog refused to proceed beyond logs. Exhibited backing behavior and low whining. Behavior suggests threat detection. Searchers worked through the night, calling Klein's name continuously. No response was heard. On August 15th, a search team located Klein's water filter resting on a flat stone beside the stream, approximately 200 yards upstream from where he had separated from Hartman. The filter was positioned upright. It showed no damage. The stone was dry, suggesting the filter had not been dropped into water and retrieved. On August 16th, searchers found Klein's day pack hanging from a low branch near the location where dogs had lost his scent. The pack was zipped closed. Inside, searchers found Klein's map, wallet, and an unopened granola bar. The pack showed no tears, no dirt accumulation, no signs of struggle. It hung at chest height, as if placed deliberately. That evening, 3 members of the search team reported hearing a vocalization similar to the one Hartman had described. The sound came from approximately half a mile north of the search area. Search coordinator Alan Hobbs logged the report. Multiple team members report hearing sustained low-frequency vocalization at approximately 8:40 p.m. Duration approximately 8 to 10 seconds. Source direction estimated north-northwest. Character described as neither human nor consistent with known wildlife vocalizations in region. No visual confirmation of source. Robert Klein was never located. Search efforts continued intermittently for 3 weeks, covering over 12 square miles of terrain. Acoustic testing conducted informally by search coordinators in similar terrain confirmed that voice range under dense canopy can be reduced dramatically. In one test, 2 individuals standing 40 yards apart in heavy oak maple forest could not hear each other shouting. The same individuals could communicate easily at 150 yards in open meadow conditions. Yet the vocalizations heard by Hartman and later by search team members carried clearly across distances measured in hundreds of yards, through dense forest canopy, with volume and clarity that contradicts known acoustic principles for human voice. The low frequency of the sounds would allow greater propagation distance than high-frequency human speech. suggesting a vocal source with different physical characteristics, a larger resonating chamber, greater lung capacity, or both. The forest absorbs sound. This is measurable. What is more difficult to explain is why vocalizations of unusual character carry distances that human voices cannot match, why these sounds appear in the immediate aftermath of disappearances, and why trained search dogs react with fear to areas where such sounds originate. The pattern persists. The calls continue. The forest offers no identification of what makes them. Search dogs are trained to follow human scent using one of several methodologies. Trailing dogs follow ground scent left by skin cells, sweat, and bacteria shed by moving humans. Air scent dogs follow scent particles suspended in air currents. Cadaver dogs detect compounds associated with decomposition. Each method has strengths and limitations, but all rely on a fundamental principle. Scent disperses predictably based on environmental conditions. In stable weather, low wind, moderate humidity, mild temperature, scent trails persist for hours and disperse gradually. Handlers expect trails to fade rather than terminate. A fading trail shows weakening signals as dogs move farther from the source. A terminating trail shows strong signals that end abruptly, as if the source ceased producing scent at a specific point. Termination typically occurs when a subject enters water, climbs into a vehicle, or reaches a point where wind or other environmental factors scatter scent beyond the dog's detection threshold. In Manistee National Forest cases, dogs frequently encounter scent termination at points where none of these environmental factors are documented. More significantly, dogs consistently exhibit behavioral responses that handlers associate with predator detection, rather than simple scent loss. These responses, backing away, refusing to proceed, submissive posturing, and vocalization indicating distress, appear in canine logs across multiple agencies and span decades. In October 1996, a hunter named Thomas Riley, age 48, entered state land adjacent to the National Forest near Luther to scout for deer sign. Riley was an experienced hunter who had worked the area for over 15 years. He drove a tan Jeep Cherokee and carried a GPS unit, rifle, and basic supplies. On October 19th, Riley parked at a 2-track intersection and walked east into mixed forest. He told a hunting partner via CB radio at 1:20 p.m. that he would return within 2 hours. Riley did not return. His partner contacted authorities at 4:45 p.m. Search teams deployed at first light on October 20th. A German shepherd named Duke, handled by Deputy James Corrigan, tracked Riley's scent from the Jeep into the forest. Duke followed a clear trail for approximately 1.2 miles, moving steadily through oak and pine stands. At 10:30 a.m., Duke stopped at an open area beneath a large white pine. The dog sat, indicating end of trail. Corrigan noted, Duke indicated termination. No water nearby, no terrain barrier, wind less than 5 ft/s, scent trail ended without dispersal pattern. What Corrigan also noted in a section of his report marked for departmental review only, Duke exhibited avoidance response consistent with large predator presence. Ears back, tail tucked, reluctance to approach termination point. Attempted to redirect Duke multiple times. Dog refused with increasing stress response. Corrigan examined the termination area carefully. The ground showed disturbance. Compressed leaf litter in a pattern suggesting something large had lain or crouched there. The compressed area measured approximately 5 feet in length and 3 feet in width. Near the edge of the compressed area, Corrigan found what he described as partial impressions consistent with bipedal stance, 2 deep depressions spaced approximately 18 inches apart, each measuring roughly 14 inches in length. Corrigan photographed the impressions but did not include them in his public report, noting only, ground disturbance observed at scent termination point, origin undetermined. Searchers expanded the area systematically. On October 22nd, they found Riley's GPS unit resting on a stump approximately 300 yards north of where Duke had stopped. The unit was functional, battery at 60% capacity. The screen showed no cracks. The unit's stored waypoints included Riley's vehicle location and planned route. Nothing indicated why the unit had been removed and placed on the stump. Near the stump, searchers noted broken branches on several young maples at heights between 7 and 8 feet above ground. The brakes were fresh, showing green wood beneath the bark. Thomas Riley was not located. His case remains open. In May 2003, a birdwatcher named Angela Pruitt, age 35, hiked a trail near Bowman Lake to photograph migratory warblers. Pruitt worked as a biology teacher in Traverse City and had birded the Manistee region for over a decade. She carried camera equipment, binoculars, field guides, and water. On May 10th, Pruitt signed the trailhead register at 8:30 a.m., noting she planned a 4-mile loop. When Pruitt did not return by evening, park staff contacted the Mason County Sheriff's Office. Search efforts began on May 11th. A Labrador retriever named Scout, handled by volunteer searcher Emily Torres, tracked Pruitt's scent from the trailhead along the marked trail. Scout followed the scent for approximately 2 miles before stopping at a slight rise, where the trail curved through a stand of young aspen. Scout's behavior changed dramatically at the termination point. Torres reported, "Scout indicated end of trail with standard site response. Upon attempting to work Scout in expanding pattern from termination point, dog exhibited extreme fear response. Pulled backward on lead, tuck tail, began trembling. Behavior unprecedented in 5 years working with this animal." Torres examined the area. She found no obvious environmental factors that would explain Scout's response. However, she noted several observations in her field log. Strong musky odor present at termination point. Odor unfamiliar, not consistent with deer, bear, or other common wildlife. Several trees show bark damage at 6 to 8 foot height. Damage appears recent, showing fresh scarring. Patterns suggest deliberate marking behavior. Ground teams searched the immediate area and found Pruitt's field guide resting on a fallen log 50 yards from where Scout had stopped. The book was closed, pages dry despite light rain the previous night. A bookmark remained in place at a page describing yellow-rumped warblers. Near the field guide, investigators found what appeared to be a single footprint in a patch of soft soil. The print measured approximately 17 inches in length, showed 5 distinct toe impressions, and demonstrated weight distribution consistent with bipedal locomotion. The print was photographed and cast in plaster. The cast was examined by Dr. Jeffrey Morrison, a forensic anthropologist contracted by the Mason County Sheriff's Office. Morrison's report, filed under case evidence, noted, "Cast demonstrates morphology inconsistent with known human foot structure. Length, width, and toe configuration suggest non-human primate characteristics. No known primate species exists in Michigan's natural fauna. Origin of impression cannot be determined from available evidence." Angela Pruitt was never found. Search efforts covered over 8 square miles across 10 days. Her camera was never recovered. Her case remains unresolved. K9 handlers working Manistee searches note recurring patterns beyond simple scent termination. Dogs demonstrate fear responses, tucked tails, submissive urination, refusal to proceed, trembling, and backing behavior. These responses are distinct from the frustration or confusion dogs show when losing scent in water or due to weather conditions. Handlers with decades of experience describe the behavioral indicators as matching responses to large predators, mountain lions, bears, or wolves. Yet no such predators exist in Michigan at densities that would explain the frequency of these responses. More troubling to handlers is the consistency across different dogs, agencies, and time periods. Dogs that have never worked together, handled by different trainers using different methodologies, exhibit identical responses at termination points in the Manistee corridor. This consistency suggests the stimulus producing the fear response is present repeatedly in multiple locations across decades. The pattern accumulates in logs filed across counties and years. Dogs stop, dogs fear, trails end. The forest offers no clarification of what causes trained animals to refuse their work. A recurring feature in Manistee disappearances involves vehicles found in states suggesting imminent return rather than abandonment, keys left in ignition or on seats, doors unlocked or slightly ajar, personal items, wallets, phones, glasses left visible inside. These configurations suggest occupants intended to return within minutes, not hours or days. From a behavioral perspective, this pattern contradicts typical abandonment scenarios. Individuals fleeing danger remove keys to prevent vehicle theft. Individuals planning extended absence secure vehicles and remove valuables. Individuals experiencing medical emergencies or disorientation rarely organize belongings neatly before departure. The Manistee cases show repeated instances of vehicles left, as if owners stepped away briefly and never returned. What distinguishes some Manistee vehicle discoveries from standard missing person scenarios is the presence of evidence suggesting something approached the vehicle after the occupant departed. This evidence appears in investigative reports but rarely in public summaries. In March 1981, a college student named Brian Hutchins, age 22, drove north from Grand Rapids to camp in the Manistee National Forest during spring break. Hutchins attended Ferris State University and had camped in the forest multiple times. He drove a silver Datsun hatchback and carried camping gear, food, and textbooks. On March 14th, Hutchins called his roommate from a payphone in Baldwin, stating he had found a campsite and would return to campus on March 17th. Hutchins did not return. His roommate contacted authorities on March 18th. Search teams located Hutchins' Datsun on March 19th, parked on Forest Service Road 5723 near Timber Creek. The vehicle was unlocked. Keys sat on the driver's seat. The windows were closed. Hutchins' wallet rested on the dashboard, containing cash and identification. His camping gear, tent, sleeping bag, cookware, was packed in the rear cargo area, untouched. Footprints led from the vehicle toward a nearby creek. Searchers followed the prints for approximately 200 yards before losing them on leaf litter. Search dogs tracked Hutchins' scent along the same route. The scent trail ended at a point where the creek widened into a shallow pool. Handler Mark Saunders noted, "Scent terminated at creek edge. Water too shallow to account for loss. No evident subject entered water. Opposite bank showed no continuation. Dog refused to approach water, displaying fear response." What was not included in the public case summary but appears in the investigative file was the condition of the vehicle upon discovery. The driver's side door showed scratches on the exterior paint, 4 parallel marks running vertically along the door panel. The scratches were deep, penetrating through paint to bare metal, and spaced approximately 3 to 4 inches apart. Deputy Sharon Hayes photographed the marks and noted, "Scratch pattern consistent with claw marks. Spacing and depth suggest source significantly larger than known wildlife in region." The hood of the Datsun showed similar marks, 3 deep scratches running diagonally across the hood surface. The windshield showed a large impact point on the passenger side, creating a circular crack pattern approximately 8 inches in diameter. The glass had not shattered but showed significant stress damage consistent with substantial impact force. Inside the vehicle, investigators found additional anomalies. The rearview mirror had been torn from its mounting, remaining attached only by wiring. The overhead fabric liner showed a tear near the rearview mirror mount. Most significantly, the driver's seat was pushed fully forward, compressing against the steering wheel, a position that would have been impossible for Hutchins to drive in. The seat adjustment mechanism showed no damage, indicating the seat had been moved deliberately after the vehicle was parked. The search expanded over 5 days. Divers checked the creek and downstream sections. No evidence of Hutchins was found. His textbooks remained in the vehicle, open to pages suggesting he had been studying shortly before departure. Near the vehicle, searchers found several large impressions in soft soil at the edge of the road. The impressions measured approximately 16 inches in length and showed distinct toe marks. The impressions led away from the vehicle into the forest but became impossible to follow on harder ground after 30 yards. Brian Hutchins' case remains unsolved. In July 1998, a photographer named Denise Morton, age 37, drove into the forest to capture sunrise images. Morton lived in Muskegon and worked as a freelance photographer for regional magazines. She drove a red Honda Civic and carried professional camera equipment. On July 9th, Morton left home at 5 a.m., informing her husband she would photograph dawn light near the Père Marquette River. Morton did not return. Her husband reported her missing that evening. Searchers found her Civic on July 10th, parked on a pullout along M37 near the river overlook. The vehicle appeared normal at first examination. It was locked, but keys were visible on the driver's seat, dropped through a partially opened window. Morton's camera bag sat on the passenger seat, zipped closed. Inside the bag, searchers found 2 camera bodies, 5 lenses, filters, and memory cards. All equipment was organized and undamaged. Upon closer inspection, investigators noted irregularities. The driver's side door handle showed deep impressions, as if gripped with extreme force. The metal handle was bent slightly inward. The door lock mechanism showed damage consistent with attempted forced entry, though the door remained locked from inside. Most notably, the driver's side window, partially opened when the keys were dropped through, showed what appeared to be smudge marks on the exterior glass. The marks were large, measuring approximately 6 inches across, and showed a pattern consistent with fingers or digits. However, the spacing and size of the marks exceeded normal human hand dimensions. Deputies collected samples from the smudge marks. Laboratory analysis identified the material as organic residue containing oils, proteins, and trace minerals, consistent with primate skin secretions. However, the composition showed ratios of compounds that didn't match human biochemistry exactly. The analysis report noted, sample composition suggests primate origin but demonstrates characteristics outside typical human ranges. Further analysis recommended. No footprints were visible on the paved pullout. Search teams worked the area extensively, checking riverbanks, trails, and surrounding forest. Dogs tracked a faint scent trail from the vehicle toward the river, then lost it on rocky ground approximately 100 yards from the pullout. The lead dog, a bloodhound named Sadie, refused to continue beyond a certain point, pulling backward on the lead and whining continuously. Search coordinator Alan Hobbs wrote, "Scent trail weak, possibly aged, terminated without clear cause. Dog behavior suggests threat stimulus present. Subject's equipment suggests no intent for extended absence." Near the scent termination point, searchers found broken vegetation and disturbed ground, suggesting something large had moved through recently. Several small trees showed fresh breaks at heights between 6 and 7 feet above ground. Bark on several larger trees showed gouges and tears consistent with claws, though the size and depth exceeded anything that could be attributed to black bears, the largest predator in the region. Denise Morton was never located. Her case remains open with the Newaygo County Sheriff's Office. Vehicle evidence presents investigators with contradictions. The organized state of personal belongings suggests normalcy and imminent return. The absence of subjects suggests departure became permanent. The damage to vehicles, scratches, impacts, distorted interiors, suggest interaction with something capable of generating significant force and reaching heights above typical human range. Yet no pattern of bear activity, vandalism, or human interference matches the evidence characteristics. Behavioral analysts note that most people exit vehicles with intention. They take keys if leaving for extended periods. They lock doors if concerned about security. They remove valuables if parking in remote areas. The Manistee cases show repeated deviation from these norms, with the added element of vehicles that appear to have been investigated or interacted with by something after the occupant departed. The vehicles remain where they were left. Keys rest where they were placed. The marks on metal and glass remain unexplained. The forest holds no record of what approaches parked vehicles and leaves evidence of size, strength, and bipedal locomotion. Physical evidence recovered in Manistee disappearance cases exhibits characteristics documented repeatedly across incidents. Objects appear placed rather than dropped. They rest in configurations suggesting deliberate positioning at the moment of separation. They show no damage, weathering, or disturbance despite exposure to elements across days or weeks. What distinguishes Manistee object positioning from similar patterns documented elsewhere is the apparent selectivity of items positioned and their spatial relationship to other evidence. In several cases, positioned objects appear along routes marked by unidentified tracks or near points where search dogs exhibited fear responses, creating a pattern that suggests intentional placement by something moving through the terrain with purpose. In November 1989, a deer hunter named Carl Davidson, aged 44, entered state land near Baldwin during opening day of rifle season. Davidson was an experienced hunter who had worked the same property for over 20 years. He carried a rifle, hunting license, and minimal supplies. Weather on November 15th was cold, with temperatures near 28 degrees Fahrenheit and light snow beginning mid-morning. Davidson's hunting partner, William Nash, last saw Davidson at 7:45 a.m. when they separated to work different sections of forest. Nash heard a single rifle shot at approximately 9:15 a.m. but thought nothing of it, assuming Davidson had taken a deer. When Davidson did not return to their vehicle by noon, Nash searched the area and found Davidson's rifle leaning against a tree, positioned upright as if placed carefully. The rifle was unloaded. The safety was engaged. No fired cartridges were found nearby. The positioning of the rifle was remarkable. The tree against which it leaned had a slight backward lean, meaning an object simply leaned against it would slide down. The rifle remained in place, suggesting it had been wedged or balanced with care. Nash called for assistance. Search teams deployed immediately. They located Davidson's gloves approximately 200 yards from the rifle, resting on a moss-covered log. The gloves were positioned side by side, palms down, fingers aligned, as if Davidson had removed them carefully and placed them with deliberation. The moss showed no compression beneath the gloves, suggesting they had been placed rather than dropped. Near the gloves, searchers found tracks in light snow, human boot prints matching Davidson's size, and alongside them larger barefoot impressions measuring approximately 15 inches in length. Searchers found Davidson's hunting license in a plastic sleeve, placed on a flat stone another 150 yards north. The plastic showed no scratches. The license remained dry inside, positioned facing upward so the text was readable. The stone on which it rested was elevated slightly above surrounding ground, requiring deliberate selection rather than random placement. What was notable to investigators was the spacing and positioning of these items. They formed a rough line, spaced at consistent intervals of approximately 200 yards, leading away from Davidson's last known location. Each item was positioned at a point of elevated ground or notable terrain feature: a prominent tree, a moss-covered log, an elevated stone. The pattern suggested intentional marking of a route. At the final item location, the hunting license, searchers found additional evidence. The ground showed disturbance consistent with something large, resting or crouching. The disturbed area measured approximately 5 feet by 3 feet. At the edge of the disturbance, investigators found what appeared to be a handprint in snow, large, measuring approximately 10 inches in length, with 5 distinct finger impressions. The print was photographed and cast. Analysis showed a hand structure with proportions outside normal human ranges: longer fingers, wider palm, greater spacing between digits. Carl Davidson was never located despite extensive searches covering over 10 square miles. Snowfall that evening obscured tracks and complicated search efforts. His case remains open. In April 2007, a jogger named Stephen Walsh, aged 33, ran trails near Udell Hills. Walsh was training for a marathon and ran the area several times weekly. He carried water, identification, and a phone. On April 22, Walsh left his apartment in Ludington at 6:30 a.m., planning an 8-mile run on forest trails. Walsh did not return. His roommate reported him missing that evening. Search teams found Walsh's water bottle on April 23, resting upright on a trailside boulder. The bottle was half full. The cap was tightened. The bottle showed no dirt or scratches despite sitting exposed for approximately 30 hours. The boulder on which it rested was smooth granite, sloping at an angle where objects would normally slide. The bottle remained in place, positioned with apparent care. Walsh's phone was discovered 300 yards farther along the trail, placed face up on a flat section of granite. The phone's battery was dead. The last call logged was to Walsh's roommate at 6:48 a.m., stating he was on the trail and conditions were good. The granite surface where the phone rested was perfectly level, one of few such surfaces in the immediate area, suggesting selective placement. Between the water bottle and the phone, searchers found tracks. Walsh's running shoe prints were clear in soft soil beside the trail. Parallel to Walsh's tracks, investigators documented larger barefoot impressions, measuring 16 to 17 inches in length, with stride lengths of 50 to 60 inches. The barefoot impressions were deeper than Walsh's tracks, suggesting significantly greater weight. The tracks continued beyond the phone location, leading off-trail into dense forest. Search teams followed the track line for approximately half a mile. The larger barefoot impressions continued consistently, while Walsh's shoe prints appeared intermittently, sometimes overlapping the larger tracks. At one point, the track pattern suggested Walsh's prints stopped, then resumed 40 feet farther along the route, with only the larger barefoot prints filling the gap. Investigators interpreted this as evidence of Walsh being carried for a short distance. The track line ended at a rocky outcrop where neither set of prints could be followed further. Near the outcrop, searchers found Walsh's identification card placed on a shelf of rock, positioned carefully so it would not blow away. The card showed no damage. Stephen Walsh was never found. His identification was the last evidence recovered. Search efforts extended over 2 weeks, involving ground teams, dogs, and aerial surveys. His case remains unresolved. Objects positioned in these ways contradict typical lost scenarios. Dropped items roll, scatter, or land at random angles. Lost items show disturbance, dirt accumulation, displacement by rain, disturbance by animals. The positioned objects in Manistee cases show none of these characteristics. They rest as if placed during a pause in activity, not discarded during distress. More significantly, the positioning appears to follow patterns, spatial lines, consistent intervals, elevated or notable locations. The association with unidentified tracks suggests the positioning is not random environmental action, but deliberate behavior by something moving through the terrain with apparent awareness of the item's significance and capability to manipulate them with precision. Search teams photographing positioned objects note difficulty replicating placements. Water bottles on slopes roll when placed. Phones on angled granite slide when touched. Rifles lean against trees only with careful wedging. Yet recovered objects remain in configurations that resist natural disturbance and appear to require manual placement by something with opposable digits, substantial strength, and considerable height reach. The positioning persists across cases separated by years and locations. Rangers document the pattern carefully. Investigators note the consistency but offer no mechanism to explain what places these objects, why they are selected, or what purpose the positioning serves. The objects remain where they were found, catalogued in evidence logs that accumulate without resolution. Experience with terrain can create behavioral patterns that increase risk rather than reduce it. Familiarity breeds confidence. Confidence reduces caution. Reduced caution leads to decisions that would be avoided in unfamiliar environments. This phenomenon, sometimes called the confidence trap, appears repeatedly in Manistee disappearances involving experienced outdoor users. Individuals familiar with an area may navigate with reduced attention to landmarks. They may venture farther from trails or roads based on memory rather than active orientation. They may carry less safety equipment, assuming they can self-rescue if problems arise. They may delay calling for help when disoriented, believing they can reorient independently. Each of these behaviors appears rational in isolation, but can compound into serious consequences when combined. What makes the confidence trap particularly relevant in Manistee cases is the possibility that experience creates predictable patterns of movement that can be anticipated. If something observes human activity in the forest over time, it may learn to recognize the behaviors associated with experienced versus inexperienced users. Experienced users who venture farther, move with greater confidence, and travel alone may become more vulnerable precisely because their competence reduces their perceived need for caution. In September 2001, a mushroom forager named Patricia Nowak, aged 56, entered the forest near Brethren to collect fall mushrooms. Nowak had foraged the same general area for over 30 years, beginning in childhood when her family camped there annually. She knew the terrain well and regularly filled baskets with chanterelles, morels, and puffballs. On September 8th, Nowak told her husband she would forage near Forest Service Road 5120 and return by afternoon. Nowak did not return. Her husband contacted authorities that evening. Search teams found Nowak's vehicle on September 9th, parked on Road 5120. Her basket sat in the back seat, empty. Footprints led from the vehicle into mature hardwood forest. Searchers tracked the prints for approximately half a mile before losing them on dry ground covered with leaves. Search dogs followed Nowak's scent along a similar route. The trail ended at a small clearing ringed by oak trees. K9 handler David Ortiz noted, "Scent terminated at clearing center. Subject likely paused here. No indication of direction after pause. Dog exhibited avoidance response, refusing to enter clearing fully." What distinguished Nowak's case was evidence suggesting she had been to the clearing before. Searchers found a small cairn of stacked stones at the clearing edge, a marker Nowak's husband confirmed she had placed years earlier to mark a productive foraging spot. Her familiarity with the location was evident, yet this familiarity may have contributed to what followed. Near the cairn, searchers found Nowak's foraging knife, placed carefully on top of the stacked stones. The knife was closed, clean, positioned deliberately. Beyond the clearing, investigators found tracks, Nowak's boot prints moving away from the clearing, and alongside them, barefoot impressions measuring approximately 16 inches in length. The prints showed Nowak walking at normal pace initially, then her stride lengthening, suggesting increased walking speed. The larger barefoot prints maintained consistent stride throughout. The track line continued for approximately 600 yards before reaching an area of dense undergrowth where tracks could no longer be followed. Along this route, searchers found Nowak's jacket folded neatly on a fallen log. The jacket was dry despite rain the previous night. It showed no damage. It was folded with the arms tucked inside, a method Nowak's husband confirmed she always used when storing the jacket. Searchers working the area reported an incident that was logged but not widely publicized. At approximately 3:30 p.m. on September 11th, a search team heard what they described as heavy bipedal footsteps moving through brush approximately 100 yards from their position. The team leader, Ranger Thomas Vickers, called out, believing another search team was nearby. The footsteps stopped. After several seconds of silence, the team heard what Vickers described as a deep exhalation, like a very large person sighing, but with a resonance that seemed too deep for human vocal cords. The sound came from the same direction as the footsteps. The team moved toward the location but found no one. The area showed disturbed vegetation, suggesting something large had moved through recently. Patricia Nowak was never located. Her husband stated she had foraged the same forest for 3 decades without incident. Her case remains open. In October 2012, a bow hunter named Gregory Foster, aged 51, hunted state land he had worked for 25 consecutive seasons. Foster lived in Baldwin and owned property adjacent to the hunting area. He knew the terrain intimately, having walked it hundreds of times. On October 14th, Foster entered the forest at dawn to sit in a ground blind he had established weeks earlier. Foster's wife expected him home by noon. When he did not return, she contacted authorities at 2 p.m. Search teams found Foster's bow in his ground blind that evening. The bow was unstrung. His pack rested beside it, containing coals, scent lures, and water. Everything was organized. Nothing suggested departure under distress. What drew investigators' attention was the condition of the blind itself. Foster had constructed it carefully over several seasons, a framework of branches and brush, creating concealment while allowing visibility in shooting lanes. The blind showed signs of disturbance. Several of the carefully placed branches had been moved, not by wind or animals, but deliberately repositioned to alter the blind's structure. The shooting lanes Foster had maintained were now obscured by branches placed across them. The disturbance suggested something had examined the blind and modified it intentionally. Near the blind, investigators found tracks, Foster's boot prints leading away from the blind toward a game trail he regularly monitored. Alongside Foster's prints were larger barefoot impressions, measuring approximately 17 inches in length. The tracks showed Foster and the unknown source of the larger prints moving in the same direction initially. Searchers located Foster's hat on October 15th, positioned on a stump approximately 400 yards from his blind along the game trail. The hat was dry. It sat crown up, brim level, as if placed deliberately. Beyond the hat, Foster's boot prints showed a change in gait. Stride length increased significantly, suggesting Foster began running at this point. The larger barefoot prints also showed increased stride, maintaining pace with Foster's running prints. The track line continued for approximately 300 more yards before reaching rocky terrain where tracks could not be followed. At the final point where tracks were visible, Foster's running prints showed what analysts interpreted as a stumble, scuff marks and toe drag suggesting Foster had lost balance. The larger barefoot prints at this same point showed a plant pattern consistent with sudden stopping. Gregory Foster was never found. His wife stated he had hunted the same property for a quarter-century without getting lost. His case remains unresolved. Experience creates patterns of movement. Individuals develop preferred routes, familiar landmarks, and mental maps of terrain. They become comfortable operating alone in environments where less experienced users would maintain group cohesion. They venture into areas during times, early morning, dusk, late season, when recreational users are absent, times when an intelligent observer would have clear opportunities to approach without witnesses. If the Manistee corridor is home to something capable of observing human patterns over time, experienced users may represent the highest risk demographic, not because of any failure in their skills, but because their confidence creates predictable isolation. They enter the forest alone. They go to the same areas repeatedly. They stay longer. They move with the certainty of people who believe they understand their environment fully. The confidence they gained through experience may have made them recognizable. The pattern of their presence may have been noted and anticipated. The forest remains unchanged. Experience offers no immunity. The pattern continues to show that those who know the terrain best are among those most likely to vanish from it. In rare cases where missing individuals are recovered alive in the Manistee corridor, their accounts include consistent anomalies. Subjects report time distortion, believing minutes passed when hours elapsed. They describe confusion about direction and distance covered. They recall calm effect, despite circumstances that should produce panic. Memory gaps appear frequently, with subjects unable to account for periods of their absence. What makes Manistee survivor accounts particularly notable are descriptions of what subjects saw, heard, or sensed during their disorientation, details that appear across multiple testimonies from individuals with no contact with each other, suggesting consistent environmental or interactive factors rather than individual psychological anomalies. In August 2004, a hiker named Rachel Torres, age 27, entered trails near High Rollaway with a friend. Torres and her companion Jennifer Moss planned a 3-mile loop on well-marked trails. On August 7th, conditions were clear with temperatures near 72 degrees Fahrenheit. At approximately 11:30 a.m., Torres stepped off the trail briefly to photograph wildflowers. Moss continued walking, expecting Torres to catch up within moments. Torres did not rejoin the trail. Moss retraced her route, calling Torres's name. She received no response. After 15 minutes of searching, Moss hiked to the trailhead and contacted park staff. Search teams deployed immediately. They searched throughout the afternoon and evening without success. On August 8th at 9:30 a.m., a search volunteer located Torres walking slowly along a service road approximately 2.5 miles from where she had separated from Moss. Torres was uninjured. Her clothing was intact. She carried her camera. When questioned, Torres stated she believed she had been separated from Moss for approximately 30 minutes. She was confused when informed she had been missing for 22 hours. Torres provided a detailed statement to Lake County Sheriff's deputies. She recalled stepping off the trail to photograph flowers. She remembered walking farther than intended, attempting to frame a shot. She felt no anxiety initially. When she turned to return to the trail, she could not locate it. She walked in what she believed was the correct direction. What Torres remembered next was fragmentary but consistent. She described becoming aware of being watched. She could not identify what was watching her or from where, but she felt certain she was being observed. The sensation was strong enough that she stopped walking and stood still, scanning the forest around her. She saw nothing unusual but could not shake the feeling of presence. Torres continued walking. She recalled hearing sounds behind her. Footsteps, she thought, but heavier than human footsteps and with a rhythm that didn't match two-legged gait perfectly. She turned several times but saw nothing. The footsteps would stop when she stopped, resume when she resumed walking. This pattern continued for what Torres estimated as 10 to 15 minutes. At one point, Torres recalled seeing something dark between trees approximately 50 yards ahead of her. She described it as much taller than it should be and darker than the shadows around it. The figure, if it was a figure, stood motionless. Torres stopped walking. She called out, asking if someone needed help. She received no response. When she looked away briefly to check her footing, then looked back, the dark shape was no longer visible. Torres had no memory of nightfall or sleeping. She could not explain how she covered 2.5 miles through unmarked forest. She did not recall being cold, hungry, or frightened, despite spending a night in the forest in summer clothing with no supplies. She described feeling accompanied rather than alone, though she saw no one after the glimpse of the dark figure. Medical evaluation at Spectrum Health Ludington Hospital found Torres to be in good physical condition. Mild dehydration was noted. No injuries were documented. No drugs or alcohol were detected. Psychological evaluation revealed no evidence of acute stress disorder or dissociative episode. Torres' camera contained 17 images of wildflowers, all time-stamped between 11:28 a.m. and 11:34 a.m. on August 7th. No additional images were recorded during her absence. Torres' account was filed and received no special attention until a similar case occurred 11 years later. In June 2015, a cyclist named Marcus Webb, aged 42, rode forest roads near Baldwin. Webb was an experienced cyclist who rode the Manistee region weekly during summer months. On June 14th, Webb began a 20-mile route on well-maintained forest roads. At approximately 2 p.m., Webb stopped at a road intersection to check his map. Another cyclist passed him, exchanging greetings. Webb appeared normal and oriented. Webb did not complete his route. His wife reported him missing when he failed to return by evening. Search teams found Webb on June 15th at 11 a.m., sitting beside his bicycle on a service road approximately 4 miles from where he had been last seen. Webb was uninjured. He was confused about his location and the date. Webb told investigators he had stopped at the intersection, checked his map, and continued riding. After several minutes, he believed 10 to 15 minutes, he became aware of something pacing him on the left side of the road, parallel to his position, moving through the forest just beyond the tree line. He could not see what was pacing him clearly, only movement through vegetation and the sound of something large moving at consistent speed. Webb increased his cycling speed. The pacing continued, matching his increased pace. Webb described feeling neither threatened nor safe, simply aware that something was accompanying him deliberately. He stopped pedaling and coasted. The movement in the forest stopped. He resumed pedaling. The movement resumed. This continued for what Webb estimated as 5 to 10 minutes. Then the pacing stopped. Webb heard nothing more. He recalled feeling tired and stopping to rest. He believed he had rested for approximately 10 minutes. He was surprised to learn he had been missing for 21 hours. Webb described one additional detail that matched Torres' account. He felt watched throughout his experience, even after the pacing stopped. He described the sensation as being looked at by something very large that was deciding what to do. He could not explain why he felt this or what gave him the impression of size, only that the sensation was persistent and specific. Medical evaluation found Webb to be physically healthy. Mild exhaustion was noted. No head trauma or other injuries were present. His bicycle showed no damage. His water bottles were empty. He carried no food and did not recall feeling hungry during his absence. These survivor accounts share features beyond time compression and memory gaps. They include sensation of being watched or followed, awareness of large presence without clear visual confirmation, feeling accompanied rather than alone, and most significantly, absence of fear or panic despite circumstances that should trigger those responses. Survivors describe their experiences in calm, measured tones, noting the strangeness intellectually but not reporting emotional distress during events. Psychologists studying time perception and stress response note that the reported calmness is inconsistent with typical fear responses to unknown threats. Humans confronted with potential predators typically experience acute stress, elevated heart rate, heightened awareness, fight or flight response. Manistee survivors report the opposite: calm acceptance, passive observation, and emotional neutrality. One theoretical framework for this pattern involves infrasound, sound waves below the frequency of human hearing, typically below 20 Hz. Large animals, including elephants and whales, produce infrasound for communication. Infrasound at certain frequencies can affect human psychology, producing feelings of unease, dread, or paradoxically calm detachment. If something in the Manistee corridor produces infrasound, either vocally or through other means, it could explain the emotional neutrality survivors report. However, this remains theoretical. What the survivor accounts document is consistent. People disappear, experience time they cannot account for, feel accompanied by something unseen, and return describing sensations they cannot fully explain. The accounts document the pattern but do not explain its source. The forest offers no clarification. The survivors remember fragments but not complete pictures. The pattern remains documented but unresolved. Standard lost person protocols emphasize the importance of stopping movement when disoriented. The acronym STOP, Stop, Think, Observe, Plan is taught in outdoor education programs. The rationale is straightforward. Movement while disoriented increases distance from last known position, exhausts energy reserves, and reduces probability of rescue. Staying in place conserves energy, keeps subjects within search areas, and makes them easier to locate. Despite widespread education on this principle, lost individuals frequently continue moving. Research on lost person behavior shows that movement continues even after individuals recognize they are lost. This phenomenon, called action bias, reflects deep-seated human responses to uncertainty and discomfort. In psychological studies, participants placed in uncertain situations show strong preferences for action over stillness. Even when action provides no clear benefit, movement feels productive. It creates the illusion of progress. It reduces the psychological discomfort of helplessness. For lost hikers, staying still feels like giving up. Moving feels like problem-solving, even when movement leads away from safety. What complicates this pattern in Manistee cases is evidence suggesting that in some instances, continued movement may not be entirely volitional. Survivor accounts, track evidence, and object positioning patterns suggest that in certain cases, lost individuals may have been guided, herded, or accompanied in their movement through terrain in ways that influence direction and duration of travel. In July 2010, a day hiker named Ethan Morris, age 25, entered the North Country Trail near Bowman Lake. Morris was hiking alone, planning a 5-mile section before returning to his vehicle. On July 18th, conditions were clear with temperatures near 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Morris carried water, snacks, and a basic first aid kit. He did not carry a GPS device or map, relying on trail markers for navigation. At approximately 1:00 p.m., Morris encountered a section of trail where markers were unclear. He believed he was continuing on the correct path but gradually deviated onto an unmarked side trail. After 20 minutes of walking, Morris recognized he could no longer see trail markers. He attempted to backtrack, but could not locate the point where he had deviated. Morris's account, provided after his recovery, described his decision-making during the next several hours. He felt uncomfortable stopping. He believed continuing to walk would eventually lead him to a road or recognizable feature. He walked for approximately 3 hours, covering an estimated 5 miles through unmarked terrain. What Morris described next was consistent with other survivor accounts, but added details. He became aware of sounds moving parallel to his route, sounds he initially attributed to deer or other wildlife. The sounds maintained consistent presence, neither approaching nor receding. When Morris changed direction, the sounds adjusted to maintain parallel position. This pattern continued for what Morris estimated as over an hour. Morris described the experience. "I started to feel like I was being corralled. Every time I tried to turn back toward where I thought the trail was, I'd hear something ahead of me in that direction, and I'd instinctively turn away. It kept happening. Looking back, it felt like I was being steered. At approximately 4:00 p.m., Morris heard voices. He shouted and moved toward the sound. He encountered a search team that had been looking for him. Morris was located approximately 2.5 miles from the trail and 1.8 miles from his vehicle. He had walked in a large arc, moving steadily away from both. Analysis of Morris's route, based on his description and GPS tracks logged by the search team, showed a curved path that avoided several points where Morris could have intersected with roads or major trails. The route suggested consistent deviation away from potential exit points, as if Morris had been guided, deliberately or through his own responses to stimuli, to remain in forest rather than emerge from it. In September 2016, a hunter named Craig Larson, aged 38, pursued a wounded deer into state land near Baldwin. Larson was an experienced hunter familiar with the area. On September 24th, Larson shot a deer at approximately 7:30 a.m. The deer ran into dense forest. Larson followed the blood trail, expecting to find the deer within a few hundred yards. Larson followed the blood trail for over a mile. The trail became difficult to follow. Larson continued searching, moving farther into unmarked terrain. When he attempted to return to his vehicle, he could not relocate the blood trail he had followed. He walked in what he believed was the correct direction. After 2 hours of walking, he did not recognize his surroundings. Larson's account included details consistent with Morris's experience. Larson described hearing movement around him, not pursuing him, but accompanying him. He would hear footsteps or brush movement to his left, then minutes later to his right, then behind him. The sounds maintained presence without approaching. Larson described feeling surrounded but not threatened. Most significantly, Larson described seeing something briefly between trees ahead of him at one point during his disorientation. He described it as extremely tall, dark brown or black, standing on 2 legs. The figure stood motionless for several seconds, then moved behind a large oak tree. Larson approached the tree. He found no one, but the ground showed a large impression where something heavy had stood. Larson stated he altered his route after this sighting, moving away from the direction where he had seen the figure. Within minutes, he heard movement again to his new direction of travel. He changed direction again. The pattern repeated. Larson described feeling herded rather than pursued. Search teams located Larson at approximately 3:45 p.m., approximately 4 miles from his vehicle. He had walked continuously for over 8 hours. When investigators mapped Larson's route based on his description and the search team's GPS data, they noted his path formed a looping pattern that avoided several logging roads he should have intersected given his described directions of travel. The pattern across these cases suggests movement that may serve purposes beyond simple disorientation. Lost individuals walk for hours, covering distances that exceed typical lost person behavior. Their routes avoid potential exit points. They describe sensations of being accompanied, steered, or herded. Some describe brief sightings of large bipedal figures that influence their direction choices. Whether this represents psychological response to isolation, actual physical presence influencing movement through sound or visual stimulus, or some combination remains unclear. What the accounts document consistently is that movement continues not just because individuals choose to move, but because something in their environment appears to encourage continued movement in specific directions. The forest provides ample terrain for continued walking. The pattern shows that lost individuals use it extensively, walking routes that keep them in forest rather than leading them out. Whether this happens through their own decisions or through environmental influence remains part of the pattern's unresolved nature. Search and rescue operations in the Manistee National Forest follow standardized protocols developed by the National Association for Search and Rescue, NASAR, and adapted by Michigan State Police and local sheriff's offices. These protocols guide search planning, resource deployment, and operational decision-making. They are evidence-based, refined through decades of field experience. Yet in Manistee cases, standard protocols regularly fail to locate subjects despite rapid deployment and extensive effort. What complicates search operations in the Manistee corridor beyond typical challenges is the accumulation of anomalous observations documented by search personnel. Observations that do not fit standard lost person scenarios and that suggest search areas may be influenced by factors not accounted for in planning models. Search protocols begin with establishing the point last seen (PLS), the location where the subject was last observed or where evidence suggests their presence. From the PLS, search coordinators define a search area based on statistical models of lost person behavior. These models consider factors including terrain, weather, subject category, hiker, hunter, child, elderly, and time elapsed since disappearance. For day hikers in forested terrain, statistical models predict that 50% of subjects will be found within 1 mile of PLS, 75% within 2 miles, and 95% within 4 miles. These predictions assume subjects move randomly or follow terrain features that guide movement predictably, downhill toward water, along drainages, or following paths of least resistance. In Manistee cases, these predictions frequently fail. Subjects are either not found at all or found at distances and locations that fall outside statistical expectations. More significantly, search teams document observations that suggest something may actively interfere with search operations. In May 1993, a birdwatcher named Helen Garrett, age 62, was last seen on a trail near the Pere Marquette River. Garrett was walking alone, carrying binoculars and a field guide. A fellow hiker passed her at approximately 10 a.m. and exchanged greetings. Garrett appeared oriented and relaxed. She was reported missing when she failed to return to the trailhead by evening. Search operations began at dawn on the following day. Coordinators established PLS at the location where Garrett was last seen. They defined a 4-mile radius search area and deployed ground teams in grid patterns. Search dogs worked from PLS outward. Helicopters surveyed visible terrain. The search continued for 8 days, involving over 100 personnel. What made this search particularly frustrating for coordinators was a series of observations that suggested proximity to the subject without contact. On day 2, a search team reported hearing what sounded like a woman calling for help from approximately 300 yards ahead of their position. The team moved quickly toward the sound. When they reached the estimated origin point, they found no one. They called out repeatedly. No response was received. On day 3, 2 separate search teams working parallel tracks approximately 1 mile apart. Both reported hearing vocalizations at approximately 2:15 p.m., a high-pitched call that could have been human. Both teams moved toward the sounds they heard. Neither team found anyone. When coordinators compared reports, they realized the teams had heard sounds from opposite directions at the same time, suggesting 2 sources or acoustic anomalies that made direction finding unreliable. On day 5, a helicopter crew reported seeing what appeared to be a person wearing red clothing moving through a clearing approximately 2 miles northeast of PLS. Garrett had been wearing a red jacket. Ground teams were vectored to the location immediately. When they arrived, they found the clearing but no person. They did find a red piece of fabric caught on a branch at the clearing edge, consistent with Garrett's jacket material, but they found no footprints, no additional fabric tears, and no indication of which direction someone wearing the jacket had traveled from the clearing. Searchers found Garrett's binoculars on day 3, resting on a fallen log approximately 1.8 miles from PLS. The binoculars were undamaged and positioned neatly. On day 5, searchers found Garrett's field guide placed on a flat rock approximately 2.4 miles from PLS in a different direction. The book was closed and dry. On day 7, searchers found Garrett's jacket, the source of the red fabric, folded on a stump approximately 3 miles from PLS, outside the initial search radius. What disturbed search coordinators was the spatial relationship of these items. They formed a rough triangle with the jacket at the apex, approximately 3 miles from PLS and 2 miles from each of the other items. The distribution suggested either Garrett had traveled in a triangular route covering over 6 miles of difficult terrain, or her belongings had been moved and positioned by something else. Near each item location, searchers found tracks, some consistent with Garrett's shoe size, others significantly larger and barefoot. The larger tracks appeared fresher in some cases than Garrett's tracks, suggesting they had been made after her passage through the areas. Helen Garrett was never located. Search coordinator William Preston noted in his final report, "Item locations do not suggest coherent movement pattern. Subject's route cannot be reconstructed from available evidence. Multiple anomalous observations during search operations suggest environmental factors may have compromised standard search effectiveness." In October 2009, a hunter named Victor Salazar, age 47, was last seen entering state land near Baldwin. Salazar was hunting alone and planned to return to his vehicle by noon. When he did not return, his hunting partner contacted authorities. At 2:00 p.m., search operations began immediately. This search became notable for the number of times searchers reported sensing they were close to the subject without achieving contact. On day 1, 3 different search teams reported smelling wood smoke at different times and locations within the search area. Each team investigated, believing Salazar might have built a fire. No fire sites were found. The smoke smell would appear briefly, then dissipate without identifiable source. On day 2, searchers heard what sounded like chopping or wood striking wood coming from a densely forested ravine. Multiple teams converged on the location. They found no one, but the ground showed recent disturbance, broken branches and compressed vegetation suggesting something large had been present. Search dogs deployed on day 3 tracked Salazar's scent for approximately 900 yards before losing the trail. What was unusual was that 3 different dogs, worked by different handlers at different times, all lost Salazar's scent at the same point, a specific large oak tree. All 3 dogs exhibited similar behavior: strong tracking up to the tree, then complete scent loss, then reluctance to continue past the tree despite handler encouragement. Handlers examined the area around the tree carefully. They found no environmental factors, water, strong wind, contamination, that would explain scent loss. What they did find were marks on the oak tree's bark at heights between 6 and 8 feet above ground, gouges and scrapes suggesting something had climbed or marked the tree recently. Searchers recovered Salazar's rifle on day 2, leaning against a tree approximately 1 mile from PLS. On day 4, they found his hunting license placed on a stump approximately 1.5 miles from PLS in a direction perpendicular to the rifle location. On day 6, they found his backpack hanging from a branch approximately 2.8 miles from PLS, well outside the predicted search area. The backpack's position was notable. It hung from a branch 9 feet above ground. The branch showed no sign of bending or breaking. The backpack had been lifted and placed there with enough force or reach to achieve the height. Inside the pack, searchers found Salazar's water, snacks, and GPS unit, all organized and undamaged. Victor Salazar was never found. Search coordinator Angela Ruiz wrote, "Evidence distribution suggests subject moved through terrain in non-standard pattern. Statistical models did not predict item locations or subject range. Multiple search anomalies documented, including acoustic misdirection, olfactory phenomena, and equipment positioning at heights suggesting non-human interaction. Search area expanded beyond typical parameters without success. Protocol limitations become apparent in these cases. Statistical models assume predictable behavior. When behavior deviates from predictions, or when evidence suggests subject belongings are moved by something other than the subject, search areas may exclude locations where evidence actually exists. More troubling are observations suggesting search operations themselves may be monitored and influenced. Sounds that draw teams to empty locations, scents that disappear without source, sightings of red clothing that lead to positioned fabric rather than the subject wearing it. Search coordinators rarely discuss these observations publicly. They appear in operational logs and final reports, but not in media briefings. The observations suggest a level of complexity beyond standard lost person scenarios, a possibility that something in the environment is aware of search operations and capable of influencing their effectiveness. The protocols remain in place because they represent best available methods. Deviating from evidence-based approaches would likely decrease success rates further. Yet the Manistee cases accumulate, subjects not found, evidence scattered in patterns that resist explanation, searches complicated by observations that suggest more than environmental chance. The protocols continue to be followed. The searches go on. The observations accumulate in logs that document not just what was found, but what was sensed, heard, and seen briefly before vanishing. Residents living near the Manistee National Forest possess knowledge that does not appear in official reports. This knowledge is transmitted informally, through conversation, cautionary advice, and stories shared among those who work and recreate in the forest regularly. It is not recorded in ranger logs or search reports. It exists in the careful language people use when discussing certain areas, certain roads, certain sounds, and certain observations they would prefer not to describe in detail. When asked directly, longtime residents describe the forest in measured terms. They acknowledge its beauty and accessibility. They emphasize that most visitors experience no problems. Yet they also share observations accumulated across years of living adjacent to the corridor. Observations that often reference something large, bipedal, and persistent in areas where incidents occur. Walter Haynes, age 74, has lived near Baldwin his entire life. He worked as a logger in the 1960s and 70s, cutting timber across much of the national forest. In a conversation recorded in 2018, Haynes spoke about sections of forest he preferred to avoid. "There are roads I won't take even now. Not because they're dangerous in an obvious way, just because they feel watched. You drive down them and you get this sense that something is keeping pace with you in the trees. Most guys who work these woods have had it happen. You learn which roads give you that feeling and you use different routes." Haynes described specific locations: intersections where multiple logging roads meet, sections of forest where undergrowth grows unusually dense, areas where wildlife seems scarce despite suitable habitat. When pressed about what might cause these observations, Haynes stated, "My father logged these woods before me. He told me straight, there are things here that were here before us and will be here after we're gone. Big things that walk on two legs like we do, but they're not us. You don't see them often, but you know when they're around. The forest changes, gets quieter. You feel eyes on you." Mary Kovich, aged 68, has operated a campground near Wellston since 1985. She regularly advises campers on trails and forest roads. In a 2019 interview, Kovich discussed patterns she has observed. People come back from certain trails confused. They say they got turned around even though the trail was clear. They lose time they can't account for. Some of them mention seeing something big and dark between the trees. They usually don't want to call it anything specific. They just say something or someone. After you hear it enough times, you start directing people to different trails. Kovich keeps informal records of these reports. Guests mentioning disorientation, time gaps, or sightings of large figures in the forest. She does not share these records with authorities, but uses them to inform her advice to future guests. She estimates she has documented over 40 such reports across 34 years of operation. When asked what she believes guests are seeing, Kovich stated, "There's something in these woods that doesn't want to be seen clearly, but it's there. People who spend time here know it. We just don't talk about it much because saying it out loud makes you sound crazy." Thomas Byrne, age 56, works as a field biologist for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. His work involves wildlife surveys and habitat assessment throughout the Manistee region. In a 2020 conversation, Byrne discussed observations made during fieldwork. There are sections where animal behavior changes noticeably. Deer trails that should continue through suitable habitat terminate abruptly. Birds vocalize differently, less frequently, or with alarm calls that suggest predator presence. Small mammals show avoidance of certain areas despite no apparent reason. I've found tracks that don't match anything in our field guides. Large, human-shaped, but too big. Official policy is not to speculate about what makes them. Byrne clarified that he has never seen what makes the tracks directly, but he has heard vocalizations during fieldwork that he cannot attribute to known species. He described one incident in particular. "I was sampling vegetation in a remote section near the Père Marquette River. Mid-afternoon, quiet conditions. I heard what sounded like a very loud, deep howl, similar to a wolf howl but lower in pitch and much more powerful. It lasted about 8 seconds. I've heard wolves. This wasn't wolves. It was something much larger. I packed up and left the area. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Hunting guides working the region share similar knowledge. They learn through experience which areas produce consistent success and which areas feel wrong despite appearing suitable. Several guides, speaking on condition of anonymity, described incidents of finding large barefoot tracks near their tree stands or ground blinds, tracks that appear overnight, suggesting something visited the hunting location when no one was present. One guide stated, "You set up your stand, everything's fine. Next morning you come back and there are these huge prints all around the base of your tree. Whatever made them stood right there, looking up at where you'd be sitting. Makes you think twice about going back." Local emergency responders, EMTs, volunteer firefighters, sheriff's deputies, who have participated in searches share observations informally. Several described incidents of hearing vocalizations during night searches that did not match known wildlife. Others describe finding evidence, tracks, disturbed vegetation, positioned objects that suggested something was present in search areas but avoiding contact with teams. One deputy, speaking off record, stated, "We're supposed to document everything we find. Some things we find don't go in the official reports. You write it down and it sounds insane. But when 4 or 5 guys all see the same thing, you know it's real. You just don't know what to call it." The most consistent element across local testimonies is reference to something bipedal and large. Residents describe it using careful language. What walks the woods? The tall ones. What you don't see clearly. Very few use specific names like Bigfoot or Sasquatch, though the descriptions align with those terms. The reluctance to name it directly seems cultural, a sense that naming it makes it more real, more present, more something that requires official acknowledgement rather than informal awareness. This local knowledge does not claim supernatural causes. Residents who share it emphasize they are describing observations, not theories. They do not seek to explain what they have seen or heard, only to note that patterns exist, that these patterns are recognized by people who spend significant time in the forest, and that the patterns persist across generations of local experience. Official agencies do not incorporate this knowledge into search protocols or public safety messaging. The knowledge remains informal, transmitted person to person, used to inform individual decision-making but not systematically documented or analyzed. The locals continue to speak quietly. They direct visitors away from certain areas without explaining why fully. They acknowledge what the forest holds without insisting others believe it. The observations accumulate across decades, generations and families that have lived adjacent to the corridor since before it was designated as national forest. What they know through experience. What they avoid through wisdom passed down. And what they say, when they say anything at all, is consistent. Something large walks these woods on 2 legs, and it's been here longer than any of us. Cartographic analysis of Manistee disappearances reveals spatial patterns not immediately apparent from individual case reviews. When incident locations are plotted on maps and analyzed collectively, clusters emerge along specific terrain features and geographic corridors. Corridors that overlap with areas where local residents report sightings of large bipedal figures and where track evidence has been documented most frequently. In 2017, a Geographic Information Systems (GIS) analyst named Derek Palmer conducted an independent study of Manistee missing persons cases spanning 1970 to 2016. Palmer obtained case files through Freedom of Information Act requests and extracted location data where available. He plotted 28 cases with sufficient location information on USGS topographic maps and satellite imagery. Palmer's analysis identified 3 primary clusters. The first cluster, containing 11 cases, centered on a corridor running roughly northeast-southwest between Baldwin and Wellston, following the general alignment of Forest Service Road 5118s and adjacent terrain. The second cluster, containing 7 cases, centered on areas adjacent to the Père Marquette River between M37 and US 31. The third cluster, containing 6 cases, centered on state land south of Baldwin near the Manistee River headwaters. Palmer noted that these clusters did not align perfectly with areas of highest recreational use. Popular camping areas and heavily trafficked trails did not show elevated incident rates. Instead, clusters appeared along corridors characterized by complex networks of old logging roads, mixed forest types, and terrain features including small wetlands, abandoned railroad grades, and areas of transitional forest age. What Palmer found most significant was spatial correlation between incident locations and historical reports of unusual activity. Using newspaper archives dating to the 1920s, Palmer identified reports of wild man sightings, giant footprint discoveries, and livestock predation by unknown animals. When he plotted these historical reports alongside modern disappearance locations, he found substantial geographic overlap. Areas where incidents occur today are often areas where unusual reports originated decades earlier. Palmer's analysis also examined elevation profiles along incident corridors. He found that disappearances occurred more frequently in zones where elevation varied between 800 and 950 feet above sea level, creating landscapes of moderate relief with numerous small drainages and subtle ridgelines. These terrain features create navigation challenges while also providing cover and movement corridors for large animals. If something intelligent and mobile uses the terrain deliberately, these features would provide optimal routes for movement while minimizing human contact. In 2020, a forest ecologist named Sarah Chen examined vegetation patterns in Palmer's identified corridors. Chen used historical aerial photography and forest inventory data to characterize forest composition and structure. She found that incident corridors contained disproportionate amounts of transitional forest. Areas that had been clear-cut in the late 1800s, partially reforested in the early 1900s, and then subjected to selective cutting in the 1960s and 70s. This history created complex forest structure, patches of mature timber interspersed with younger growth, dense understory vegetation in some areas, open understory in others. Chen noted that such habitat diversity would support a wide range of prey species, deer, rabbits, small mammals, making it attractive habitat for large predators. She also noted that transitional forest provides visual cover while allowing movement, important characteristics for any animal avoiding human detection. Chen was careful to state she was describing habitat quality generally, not making claims about what might inhabit it. However, her analysis demonstrated that incident corridors represent optimal habitat for large mobile animals that require prey density, cover, and movement routes while minimizing human contact. Geological analysis provides additional context. The Manistee region sits on glacial deposits, primarily sandy soils with scattered clay lenses and gravel layers. Bedrock lies 50 to 200 feet below surface. The glacial history created subtle topography, low ridges, shallow swales, isolated depressions. This topography doesn't create dramatic landscape features, but does create numerous parallel corridors, ridgelines and drainages that run for miles with minimal human development. If something uses these corridors for long-distance movement, it could traverse large sections of the forest while rarely encountering roads, trails, or development. The corridor structure would allow movement from the northern sections of Manistee National Forest south to the Manistee River, then east toward less developed state land, a network spanning over 80 miles of terrain with multiple connection points and minimal human infrastructure. Researchers examining track evidence have noted similar patterns. Documented track finds concentrate along the same corridor systems Palmer identified. A database maintained informally by outdoor enthusiasts includes over 60 documented large track finds in the Manistee region between 1990 and 2023. When these track locations are mapped, they cluster along corridors connecting the three primary incident zones. The track evidence suggests not random presence but regular movement, animals or entities using specific routes repeatedly. If tracks represent a population rather than sporadic visits by individuals, the corridor system would provide habitat connectivity necessary for a mobile population to persist across decades. Maps show roads, trails, water features, and elevation contours. They do not show the corridor systems that something intelligent might use deliberately, the ridgelines that parallel roads without intersecting them, the drainages that provide cover while allowing movement, the transition zones between forest types that offer both concealment and visibility. These lines appear only through accumulated incident data, track evidence, and local testimony that identifies areas where something is consistently present. Palmer, Chen, and others who have studied Manistee spatial patterns emphasize they are describing landscape characteristics and spatial correlations, not making definitive claims about what inhabits the corridors. However, the data show clear patterns. Incidents cluster spatially. Clusters overlap with optimal habitat for large mobile animals. Corridors provide movement routes that minimize human contact, and the pattern persists across decades. The maps continue to show physical features. The patterns continue to cluster along certain corridors, and what walks those corridors remains visible primarily through the evidence it leaves behind. Tracks, positioned objects, and the spaces on maps where people enter and do not return. Before conclusions can be drawn about what might explain the Manistee pattern, it is necessary to examine what does not explain it. Multiple hypotheses have been proposed over decades of incident review. Most do not withstand systematic examination, except one possibility that evidence consistently supports, but that remains officially unacknowledged. Wildlife attacks do not explain the pattern in conventional terms. Michigan's documented large predators, black bears and coyotes, rarely attack humans. Black bear attacks in Michigan are exceptionally rare, with no fatal attacks recorded in modern record-keeping. Bears are omnivorous and typically avoid human contact. Coyotes are small predators that feed primarily on rodents, rabbits, and deer fawns. They do not attack healthy adult humans. Moreover, conventional wildlife attacks leave evidence. Torn clothing, blood, drag marks, and scattered belongings appear at attack sites. Predators consume remains or cache them. In Manistee cases, evidence of this kind is absent. Objects are positioned neatly. No blood evidence appears. Clothing, when found, shows no damage. However, if the wildlife in question is not documented, if something large, intelligent, and bipedal exists in the Manistee corridor, the pattern fits predation behavior of a different kind. Large primates, including gorillas and orangutans, are capable of ambush and strength-based capture without leaving conventional predation evidence. Primate predation focuses on interception and restraint rather than wounding pursuit. Objects might be examined and positioned deliberately. Prey might be carried without leaving drag marks. The pattern matches primate behavior more closely than conventional predator behavior. Criminal activity does not explain the pattern. Serial predation or kidnapping operations require access to victims, transportation of victims, and disposal of evidence. In Manistee cases, most disappearances occur in daylight in areas without road access for vehicles. Witnesses frequently see subjects shortly before disappearance, noting normal behavior and no indication of following or surveillance. The track evidence found at multiple scenes, large barefoot impressions consistent with bipedal locomotion, doesn't match human foot morphology. The positioning of objects at heights exceeding normal human reach does not match human capabilities. The acoustic evidence, vocalizations described as too deep and powerful for human voice, does not match human vocal production. If criminal activity were involved, it would require participation by individuals with non-human physical characteristics. Simple environmental hazards do not explain the pattern. Falling deaths require cliffs or steep slopes. The Manistee terrain lacks significant vertical relief. Drowning requires bodies of water. Many cases occur far from water, and extensive water searches fail to locate remains. Exposure deaths require prolonged cold or heat. Most disappearances occur in mild weather, and subjects would need to survive extended periods before succumbing. Medical emergencies, heart attacks, strokes, seizures, cause sudden incapacitation. Individuals experiencing such emergencies collapse where they stand. They do not walk miles while distributing belongings in organized patterns. Search teams trained to locate incapacitated subjects work carefully in areas around last known positions. In Manistee cases, thorough searches of predicted locations fail to find subjects who should be present if medical incapacitation occurred. Psychological factors alone do not explain the pattern. Survivor accounts describe being accompanied, herded, or watched by something physical and external. Track evidence shows bipedal impressions distinct from human feet. Dogs exhibit fear responses to physical stimuli they can detect, even when handlers cannot. Objects are positioned at heights requiring physical reach beyond human norms. These elements indicate physical interaction with something present in the environment, not purely psychological phenomena. What remains after examining what the pattern is not is evidence consistent with one explanation that official agencies do not acknowledge: the presence in the Manistee corridor of a large bipedal intelligent primate, something comparable to what informal testimony calls Bigfoot Sasquatch, or in regional terminology specific to Michigan and surrounding states, what some call dogmen when descriptions emphasize canine facial features rather than purely ape-like characteristics. The evidence supporting this explanation is substantial and consistent. Large bipedal tracks measuring 14 to 17 inches, documented in multiple incidents by law enforcement and search personnel. Vocalizations described as too deep and powerful for human voice, carrying distances that exceed human vocal range under forest conditions. Search dog fear responses consistent with large predator presence occurring at points where large tracks have been found. Object positioning at heights of 7 to 9 feet, suggesting reach exceeding normal human capability. Vehicle damage showing claw marks and impact patterns suggesting interaction by something large and strong. Survivor accounts describing tall, dark bipedal figures observed briefly before subjects became disoriented or were recovered. Spatial clustering of incidents along corridor systems that provide optimal habitat for large, mobile animals requiring cover, prey density, and human avoidance. Historical continuity of unusual reports from the region dating back over a century, suggesting persistent presence rather than recent phenomenon. Local testimony from multiple generations describing something bipedal, large, and intelligent that inhabits the forest and is encountered periodically by those who spend significant time there. This evidence does not prove the existence of an undocumented primate species in Michigan. However, it demonstrates that the Manistee pattern is consistent with the behavior, physical characteristics, and ecological requirements of such an animal if it exists. The reluctance of official agencies to acknowledge this possibility is understandable. Confirmation would require physical evidence, remains, clear photographs, capture, that has not been obtained, despite decades of reports from the region. The professional risk of proposing such an explanation exceeds the benefit of addressing the pattern more accurately. Yet the evidence accumulates. The pattern continues. The explanations that officials provide, simple disorientation, environmental hazards, statistical outliers, do not account for track evidence, dog behavior, acoustic phenomena, positioned objects, and survivor testimony that point consistently toward interaction with something large, bipedal, intelligent, and unacknowledged. The forest does not offer proof. It offers only what the records contain: observations, measurements, photographs, and testimonies that together suggest presence of something that conventional frameworks do not accept. What walks the Manistee corridor on two legs may not be human, may not be documented in taxonomic records, but appears to be physically real, behaviorally consistent, and persistently present across decades of accumulated evidence. The Manistee corridor does not end with an answer. It ends where the records end, at the boundary between what has been documented and what remains officially unacknowledged. 34 names across 5 decades. Vehicles found with keys in ignition and claw marks on doors. Objects positioned in ways that suggest handling by something large and deliberate. Search dogs that stop without environmental cause and exhibit fear of what they detect, but cannot be seen. Survivors who cannot account for lost time and describe being watched by something tall and dark between trees. Experienced users who disappear in familiar terrain along corridors marked by tracks too large for human feet. Across these 12 chapters, the same features repeat: brief separations that become permanent, calm conditions that do not predict danger, organized evidence that suggests examination rather than panic, search efforts that follow protocols and still fail, sometimes complicated by sounds, scents, and sightings that suggest something monitors operations and adjusts behavior accordingly. Track evidence documented by professionals showing bipedal locomotion at sizes and stride lengths that exceed human norms. Local knowledge passed through generations describing something that walks these woods on 2 legs, something that was here before human settlement, and remains here still. What remains is not a conclusion, but a boundary, a point where existing tools, models, and assumptions no longer provide clarity, not because the tools are inadequate, but because they were designed for known threats and documented species. The pattern operates at the intersection of terrain that provides cover, prey density that supports large predators, corridor systems that allow movement while avoiding human contact, and something intelligent enough to observe human behavior and adjust its own patterns accordingly. The boundary is not dramatic. It is simply the limit of what current frameworks acknowledge. Evidence of large bipedal primates exists in Manistee records. It appears in photographs of tracks, casts of impressions, audio recordings of vocalizations, written testimonies of reliable witnesses, and careful documentation by search professionals who note what they observe even when official reports cannot state what it suggests. The evidence points consistently toward presence of something, large, bipedal, intelligent, and unlisted in known species catalogs. Whether that something is a surviving population of unknown primates, a species that has avoided detection through intelligence and habitat selection, or something else that fits the evidence pattern remains open. What is not open is the reality of the evidence itself. The tracks exist. The vocalizations are recorded. The dogs refuse to continue for reasons they can detect. The objects are positioned by something with reach, strength, and apparent purpose. The survivors describe encounters with something that walks on two legs and stands taller than any human they have seen. If you found this examination useful, consider supporting this channel by liking and subscribing. New documentaries are released regularly, each following the same calm, evidence-focused approach to documented patterns that challenge our understanding of what inhabits the forests we consider known and mapped. If you have documented cases, track finds, audio recordings, or direct observations relevant to this topic or to similar patterns elsewhere, you are invited to share them in the comments. Sometimes careful attention and willingness to examine evidence without dismissal is the only thing that moves the record forward. What has been documented here represents decades of accumulated observations from rangers, search teams, residents, and witnesses who saw something, recorded it, and filed it away in reports that few people read completely. The forest remains unchanged. The roads continue to branch into corridors that something uses for movement through terrain it knows better than any human mapping effort has achieved. The pattern persists in logs and reports filed year after year, evidence that points towards something present, persistent, and still officially unacknowledged. What stalks the Manistee corridor on two legs may not be a single thing but a population. Animals that have learned to avoid clear observation while remaining present in forest systems that provide everything they require: food, cover, water, and terrain, complex enough that human presence remains sparse and predictable enough that it can be avoided when necessary. The documentation continues, the searches go on, and somewhere in the forest, along corridors marked on maps only by the incidents that occur there and the tracks that appear after, something moves that we have not yet named officially, but that the evidence describes in consistent detail. The records will continue to accumulate, the pattern will persist, and the question of what walks these forest roads on two legs will remain at the boundary between what we acknowledge and what we observe, until evidence becomes undeniable or until someone finally obtains the proof that shifts this from pattern to confirmed presence. Until then, the forest holds what it holds. The locals speak quietly, the searchers document what they find, and those who walk the Manistee corridor alone might consider the advice that residents have passed down through generations. Some areas feel watched for a reason. Sometimes the feeling is not wrong.